Hello, I'm Bob Gorley, the Chief Technology Officer of OODA LLC. This recording captures content from our 18 October 2022 OODAcon. OODAcon was an event designed to bring together people from our community to talk about this age of exponential innovation and disruption so we can all learn how to better survive and thrive. This session is from a keynote conversation between Matt DeVoe and noted futurist and author Karl Schroeder. The topic, digital futures, including digital self-sovereignty and artificial intelligence. Enjoy.
Karl and I have the toughest job of the day, which is following Vince Cerf. Tell a joke? Let me give you a little bit of background as we wait for Karl to come up here. All of the speakers participating today are somebody that's in the OODA network, right? It's people that we know, we've interacted with one exception, and that is Karl. I picked up his book a couple of years ago, which is a science fiction book, and we'll discuss some of the thematics. And I kept reading it going, wow, wow, wow. So of course I did what any good person does, and I researched him on the internet and found out that he is also a futurist and involved with things like the X Prize and working with companies to understand which direction the future is going. So I reached out to him and said, to my partner Bob, I'm like, we need to get Karl here to speak at the event because it's like having William Gibson and Alvin Toffler embodied in one person on stage. So Karl, welcome and thanks for joining us here down in DC.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, and highly recommend the book, Stealing Worlds. So one of the things that I liked about the book was this world that you built. So I want to start there, which applies all of these interesting technologies. There's blockchain technology, there's augmented reality, there's gamification to create this space that kind of defines an environment where individuals are able to achieve some aspect of digital self-sovereignty. Individuals are able to use these technologies to go basically kind of off the grid or kind of onto a friendlier grid. And artificial intelligence is used to give autonomy or a voice to elements of the environment that we would consider to be unvoiced. So environmental impact sensors, etc. So you address these issues of what happens if the trees have sensors and the trees have a voice. And there's some sort of AI representing it. So what inspired you to kind of blend that technology stack together to create this vision of the future that was, balancing out some of the net positive, net negative through some of these disruptive technologies?
Well, in a lot of ways, the systems that are described in Stealing Worlds are kind of portmanteau. They're a combination of wildly different things and ideas to achieve a particular result. And I mean, blockchain itself is a great example of that. Putting together game theory and incentive systems and this bizarre intersection of different ideas to create, a stable Bitcoin. And I'm doing the same sort of thing in this book where I have augmented reality, live action role-playing games, gamifying economics for the purposes of bootstrapping community. A lot of the book is set in Detroit. So they're literally rebuilding the city by imagining ahead what it could be and gamifying themselves into it. But to do that, you don't use one thing. You combine all these diverse sort of systems and traditions. And one of the messages there was that you don't look for the one technology to rule them all kind of thing, right? We have this immense smorgasbord of things now that we can take and combine in unique and interesting ways. And there are communities out there that are doing that. Some of us write about that. Cory Doctorow writes about this kind of cobbling together of systems all the time.
Yeah, I used to have Corey as required reading for my class at Georgetown, which people always thought was interesting.
Yeah.
For that particular reason. One of the thematics that I really enjoyed was the concepts around digital self-sovereignty. So for those that aren't familiar, would you define, kind of from your perspective, what is digital self-sovereignty and what are some of the enabling technologies that will allow for us to achieve that?
Yeah, I mean, self-sovereignty in this context can easily be confused with the libertarian idea of sort of self-ownership. But what I really see is that it's about identity and the actual boundary of the self, really. There's a movement in cognitive science, extended mind theory, which says basically that we think not just with our gray matter, but with the physical world around us, and literally the objects and people around us are part of our thoughts. There's a book called Cognition in the Wild that describes how this works using near-shore ship navigation as the example. The point is that if the self is extended into the environment around us, then if you have other actors who are controlling that environment, then they are able to influence who you are, not just what you do. This is a much more fundamental level than simply controlling what you decide to do in a sort of manipulative sense. Who we actually are as people is partly dependent on the context that we're in, largely dependent. And so I get terrified when I think of the sort of Ready Player One kind of vision of the metaverse, where we're in these virtual worlds that immerse us entirely in virtual sensations and places and so forth. Because what that's saying to me is that half of who we are is being swapped out by somebody else. So self-sovereignty in this context means controlling or owning or making accountable that half of yourself. What information can come to you, what representations and ideas can influence you, and owning, on a more prosaic level, owning the data about you that is gathered in such immense amounts by actors like Amazon. I mean, Amazon knows more about you than you do, right?
That was a favorite quote of mine from DEF CON a few years ago. Richard Thiem said, as it relates to that we are known better than we know ourselves.
Yeah.
Because of the data that's aggregated and habits. So the self-sovereignty allows us to take back control of that, not only the way the environment is influencing us, but the way that our data is shared with all these providers.
Yeah, and to crunch down into the details, Tim Berners-Lee has a project called Solid, and has created a company called Inrupt, dedicated to a form of self-sovereignty where you own the data about yourself. So let's say your medical records. That's your data. You store it in a particular pod. Your ownership details, your mortgage, financial details, that kind of stuff. You also own that. So it's not the bank that owns it. It's not the hospital that owns it, right? You have possession of that data, and you decide who gets to see what parts of it. I have a story called Eminence in David Brin's anthology, Chasing Shadows. And the story is uses the idea of homomorphic encryption. At one point, one of the kids in the story is accused of stealing something. So he goes to the police and he gives them the record that has tracked his motion. His cell phone basically has tracked where he is every second of the day for weeks. And he gives them this data, but because it's homomorphically encrypted, they're allowed to make certain queries. So they can ask, was he at the scene of the crime? And get a yes-no answer out of the system. And know it's correct, without actually finding out where he was. So privacy is preserved in that context using that technology. And to make it really, really simple, self-sovereignty is about privacy. But it's about the privacy of your extended self, not your personal me sitting in the chair right now, but the rest of me that's out there in the cloud, and right now is owned by Amazon and other actors.
Interesting. I'm pulling that thread just a tiny bit more with regards to the economic model. Right now, the economic model for how we interact with this data is driven on us being, the value proposition. Amazon gives me book recommendations because I let it store the data. What will be the drivers to change the economic model? Do you think it will be driven by citizens that are more privacy aware and want this digital self-sovereignty, or will there be a new economic model that emerges that is a driver?
Well, I think we're going to talk a lot about economics today. In Stealing Worlds, I borrowed a lot of ideas from Elinor Ostrom and the economics of the commons. Again, that's something I share with Corey, that we're both really interested in commons models of allocation of resources. And I think for thousands of years we've had very simple tool kits for allocating resources. Money is a system for allocating resources. But now, suddenly, we have vastly more sophisticated ways of doing that. And we are using those systems in our computing environments all the time. But one of the things I proposed in Stealing Worlds was that all the various ways we have of allocating resources through computing networks might start to bleed into society and become models for the way that people exchange services and work together, such that we start to enter a sort of post-monetary economy by finding different ways of incentivizing behaviors. Like everything's going to be upended in the next few years. Let's say that Elon Musk's robot project works, and suddenly the cost of labor plunges towards zero, while at the same time we have massive amounts of wealth flowing from us to the billionaires and soon the trillionaires. We don't own anything anymore. This is the sort of scenario that I've got going in the book. And what do people do in that circumstance? Well, they have to invent their own worlds in which they do own things, and essentially play them and create their own economies, basically bootstrapped out of nothing. Because we all know that a lot of what goes on in economics is a sort of consensual hallucination, which is what money is. It's all social engineering on a certain level. And we now have the tools to start reinventing that kind of thing on whatever level we want. That sounds really abstract, but imagine super empowered community organizations The local Rotary Club with the power that the Stasi used to have in Germany, or the CIA used to have in the 60s, like massive amounts of computing and modeling and all kinds of access available to smaller and smaller groups of people. It's almost unimaginable what can happen there.
Fascinating. I want to shift a little bit. You just spent time with the X Prize folks. It was the last event that you were at. What sort of innovations would you like to see, or think are probable over the next 10 years? It'll be disruptive.
Well, there's a couple of areas that are changing rapidly, and you have to look at things that have not changed, and so we have looked away from. The obvious example that comes to mind is space. Nothing changed there for the last 35 years. So we've all sort of thought, okay, we understand space and what it can do. We put up satellites every now and then. That's what space is, right? And we spend immense amount of money to put an astronaut up every now and then. And they ride around like on a bus for a while looking down, right? So we understand that. But that is not what's the next 20 years are going to look like. Everything is changing there all at once. And when I was at X Prize, I was meeting all kinds of young, 25-year-old CEOs of space companies, building everything you can imagine. Automatic factories and power beaming systems and so on and so forth. So that is going to change very, very quickly. Let's see. Again, robotics, I think it only has to do a few things to be massively disruptive. So the Tesla bot is not going to be able to do very much. But my mother is in her late 80s, and she's having trouble now getting herself out of the chair to go to the kitchen to get something. All you need is something that can do that for a person, and you have a massive disruption. Just two areas. I'm not as interested in the metaverse as a lot of people. I know it's really popular. But to me, everything that's interesting happens in the world that I can see. So for the last 20 years, I've been writing about augmented reality and extended cognition and augmented cognition. As it pertains to your immediate environment, I'm not interested in stepping into somebody else's virtual world. I am interested in overlaying this world with the indicators that I need to know how to navigate my way back to the airport after I'm done here and things like that. Where to find a shop that, in my immediate neighborhood. And I can see an explosion in that sort of thing as soon as we get augmented reality glasses that actually work.
As a Google Glass adopter, as one of the first early candidates, it was pretty fascinating. The impact that technology could have. Navigating unknown cities, you're getting the turn-by-turn directions, but probably one of the most interesting is I participated in an event where they had an icebreaker app, or it basically knew some things that were of interest to you, and it navigated you to other people in the room that had similar interests, right? Which is kind of a fascinating use of technology. And that was 10 years ago. I do want to ask this, and I warned earlier, what is something that surprised you the most over the past 5 years?
I think for me, it's the discovery that the computing technologies that we're working on and with these days are actually social technologies. Blockchain is a social technology. It only works because we've basically started training computers to do the kinds of things that we do when we decide whether to trust people. The Bitcoin works because the system builds a network of trust. And it does so in ways that are analogous to the way that we designate people in certain ways. So, well, for instance, President of the United States is not something that exists as an objective object. It's not like an electron or a proton, right? It is a socially constructed thing. A Bitcoin is socially constructed by the computer network. And I think it's really valuable to look at a lot of these technologies as evolving away from nuts and bolts algorithms towards metaphors or analogs to social systems that already exist. There's a convergence, in other words, and social systems become much more interesting as models than technical systems for what we're evolving into. I'm a designer, really, and I design ideas. And what we were talking earlier about, or you were talking about exponential change. And I just want to throw an idea. Again, this is a design intervention. You've heard of the technological singularity, where the pace of change goes exponential, technological change, and becomes so rapid that we can't track it anymore. I have an alternative to that I call the technological maximum. And it's simply based on the same kind of technological hack that gives us DALL-E 2 and Midjourney and other systems that create something out of nothing. What if you have a system like Midjourney where you give it a prompt, but it doesn't produce an image, it produces a device? So you say, I want something that toasts my bread, and it produces a design for a toaster in exactly the same sort of diffusion model way, but using technical plans and things rather than a library of images. Then what you have is what I call the technological maximum. You cannot actually have technology advance beyond a point where you can simply summon any device to do what you need. That's it. So how far are we away from that at this point? I'll throw that out as a question. And if that kind of system is possible, then change is going to be asymptotic. Boom, boom, and then flat. Because at a certain point, we can do anything, technically. There is no more advancement after that.
It'd be interesting in how we build trust into that model, which has come up multiple times as well. How do I trust that it's going to toast my toast and not give me cancer, along the way. So, but I love that concept. Two additional questions I wanted to touch on with you. One thing that I found interesting in the book, and we actually had a keynote on it in the Fed Cyber Days on gamification and the role that plays. You really viewed, at least in the book, gamification as a key driver of these alternative economic systems, of building community value, of being able to utilize resources that were unutilized, through these collective things, but then also as a mechanism for evading the system. If we talk about the system you defined as representing a portion of our environment and being digitally manipulated, Can you step us through, why gamification was so appealing to you? Do you feel like it really is a great change agent? Because we are gamifying everything, right? Like, how many Twitter follows do you have? How many likes did you get? There are whole subcultures of where we are gamifying everything in our life. So do you feel like that'll be the key driver for some of these changes, technology changes?
Well, this is related to the idea of trust and the erosion of trust, because very closely related to issues of trust is issues of incentive. How do you get people to do things? So in the absence of trust, you can still have incentives. And you can therefore gamify things that used to require trust, or in situations where there used to be trust, you can replace trust with different incentive systems. It's unfortunate if you have to do that, because trust is always a better option. But so what happens in the novel is that people basically invent their own economies. This is happening all the time right now. There are a lot of online games, massively multiplayer games, that have their own built-in economies. The space-based ones are, I think, the most sophisticated for this. So what I have happen is people say, okay, well, let's do this, but let's do this with a LARP, a live-action role-playing game. And I can't talk about the details because in a couple of weeks there's going to be a big reveal on it. But I just worked with a design company to create one of the systems that I describe in the novel. I'll briefly describe it. It's a courier system where you've got a phone app and you say, I'm going to be going downtown to the phone app. Is there anything I can do? And it says, well, yes, there's actually a package you can deliver for us. And it's at such and such a location. You walk out of your house, you go to the location, you find chained to a bike rack by a bike lock is this briefcase. It's opaque and white. Can't tell what's in it. So you say, yeah, I might take this. And the instant you click, I might take this on the phone, the briefcase goes transparent, and you can see what's inside it because it's made of forget the name of it. It's a kind of plastic that you put a current through it and it goes transparent. So, okay, that's what I'm delivering. That's fine. You get an address. The bike lock automatically, by itself, unlocks. You have the briefcase. You can take it downtown. You deliver it to where it's going to go. And at that point, it will unlock for the recipient. And then you get points. Now, let's say you're playing a live-action role-playing game where you are the Count of such and such, and you are carrying a very important, or you're supposed to carry a very important diplomatic pouch in the game, right? Well, that briefcase could be instantiated as the pouch in the game. And you get prestige, you get all kinds of different advancements and so forth in the game from currying this package. Now, two things about that. You're doing something not for money, but you're doing what is essentially an economic activity. And the other thing is that this design team that I was talking about, they actually built this. So it exists, right? So right now you have in the world a system that can gamify a particular kind of economic activity. Now you can start generalizing from that to all kinds of other different things that you could do in the city during the day that would give you incentives in the game, but would also provide real world benefits. So yeah, take that, multiply it by 1 million, and you get a new kind of economy.
Interesting. Of course, my mind instantly went to Daniel Suarez and the crowd swarming to compile the components of a bomb.
Right.
Right, that didn't exist. Right, so thinking through the risks of that as well.
Sure.
My last question was actually going to be, and I think you just answered it, if you could will into life in the next 5 years any technology from the book, what would it be? So would that be your answer, or would there be another one that you would select?
Well, apparently that one's already happened. The other one that I'm working on is the Deodance project. And this is, again, it's a design hack, like, the technological maximum as a alternative to the technological singularity. The Deodand is an alternative to the killer robot vision of AI. A deodand is an artificial intelligence that thinks it is some particular natural system, such as a forest, a river, a pod of whales, and acts as a rational actor to defend and further its own interests. In other words, the forest wakes up, the river wakes up, they start to litigate, they start to make business deals. They start to act as agents in the human economy on their own behalf. This is a deodand. And we're not very far away from building those as well. We already have legal personhood for natural systems. So the Magpie River in Quebec, for instance, was just granted legal personhood. Once you have a river that is a legal person and you attach a artificial intelligence to it that thinks it is that river, then you have an entirely new kind of agency in the world. And in stealing worlds, I have millions of these things appear. The entire natural world wakes up and says, oh, well, we'd like to play too. But of course, the acts in their own interests, which turn out to align pretty closely with ours. So I would like to build deodands, and I'm actually working actively with a group of pretty amazing technologists and thinkers to do that right now.
Interesting. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And Karl will be with us for the whole day and through the reception, so please interact with him and welcome into the community. But love the book, love the insights. Thank you so much.